Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well. Now, in yesterday's lecture, we had finished discussing the Stone Ages, and today we have to begin with a new chapter, that is the Harappan Civilization. Time period Harappan Civilization ka. The early phases of the Harappan Civilization started appearing as early as 3400 3500 BCE, and the Harappan sites began to disappear around 1750 BCE. Right. Now the dates obviously can vary. The Harappan civilization may be divided into various phases of evolution. The earliest being the early Harappan age, from roughly 3400 to 2600 BC. The mature Harappan age, from 2600 to, let's say, 1900 BC, and the late Harappan age, from 1900 to around 1750 BC. Now, the Harappan civilization was the first urbanized civilization in the Indian subcontinent. It flourished in the region of northwestern portion of the Indian subcontinent. It was a Bronze Age civilization that was a contemporary of other Bronze Age civilizations such as the Chinese, Mesopotamian, Persian, Egyptian civilizations, etc. However, among them, it was the largest, it was the most extensive one. We also witness the widespread use of script, town planning, the flourishing status of long distance trade, and the burgeoning industry of the Harappan cities, that is crafts production. And all this was based on a large agricultural surplus. As I have already mentioned, the Harappan civilization represented India's first urbanization. The first urbanization, the Harappan civilization. Second urbanization, Mahajanpad period or post-Vedic period. And third urbanization, Sultanate period onwards. Okay? So first urbanization tha ye. Now obviously, all these features did not emerge suddenly, right? They did not evolve suddenly. So we see an evolution of the culture of the Harappan people. Early Harappan period mein, these characteristics were in their nascent stage of development. So they were not fully developed. Mature Harappan period represented the developed phase of the civilization in which these characteristics manifested themselves with their full vibrancy. and late Harappan period corresponds with the period of decline in which these characteristics started to gradually disappear, vanish. Clear है? अच्छा. Now, if the UPSC has to ask a question, तो कौन कौन से टॉपिक से क्वेश्चन आ सकता है? ओरिजिन ऑफ द हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन, यहां से क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट थ्योरीज एंड एक्सप्लेनेशंस गिवन टू एक्सप्लेन द ओरिजिन ऑफ द हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन. A question may emerge from the features or characteristic of the Harappan civilization. Namely, what were the features of economic life of the Harappans? और यहाँ पे specifically questions may arise from the agriculture, crafts production, trade, and their impact on the lives of the Harappan people. There may be a question with regards to the political system. First of all, whether such a political system existed or not, and if it did, what was its nature? Then there may be a question with regards to the social structure and economic structure. Right? Whether the society was a flat one or was it a hierarchical one, right? Then a question related to culture, covering art, sculpture, and religion, etc. Right? So अलग अलग features के ऊपर question आ सकते हैं. Then there may be a question with regards to the decline of the Harappan civilization, a debate with regards to the factors responsible for the decline of the Harappan civilization, and secondly, the correct contextualization of decline. When we are talking in terms of decline of the Harappan civilization, what exactly it means. यहां से क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. Then we may be asked to highlight the elements of changes and continuity in the Indian culture in link to the or in association with the Harappan civilization. So how did life in the later phases differ from the Harappan period, and in what respects was it similar? And specifically over here, we'd be required to highlight the role of the late Harappan culture. ठीक है? So if the questions arise, they are probably going to arise from these areas. आपका क्या काम है? आपको आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि इन एरिया से प्रीवियसली यूपीएससी किस तरह के क्वेश्चंस पूछ चुका है. So you go back home, conduct a survey, and try to see with regards to the things that you are learning in the classroom whether you'll be able to address those questions or not. नहीं हो पा रहे हैं तो what extra things are necessary. ठीक है, तो ये आपका काम होगा. Now, first of all, क्या चीज एड्रेस करनी है हमें? The origin of the Harappan civilization. Write down. In 1921, the excavation of Harappa by John Marshall and Dayaram Sahni provided the earliest glimpses of an ancient and sophisticated urban civilization predating the Aryan culture. ठीक है. In 1922, this was followed up by the excavations at Mohenjo-daro by Rakhaldas Banerjee, by R.D. Banerjee. Full stop. Next point. These discoveries confirmed the status of India as one of the early cradles of civilization. ठीक है. Next point. Further discoveries and excavations revealed the blueprint of an ancient, advanced Bronze Age civilization in the Indus Saraswati zone that appeared to be far more extensive and advanced as compared to the other Bronze Age civilizations, such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, or China. Clear? So, like these Bronze Age civilizations, the Harappan civilization was also a Bronze Age civilization, but it was far more extensive. That is, in terms of area and population, it was far larger and far more advanced than those other civilizations. Next point likho. Naturally, from the very beginning, historians were interested in unraveling the secrets of the emergence or of the origin of the Harappan civilization. But answering these questions was not so straightforward. There were significant hurdles, challenges. Write down. However, answering these questions was challenging. First of all, the Harappan script has remained undeciphered. Okay? So we are not able to read what the Harappans wrote about themselves, which could have provided us important clues with regards to their origin. And secondly, there are practical problems associated with archaeology. एक्सकवेशंस दो तरह के हो सकते हैं, वर्टिकल एक्सकवेशंस और हॉरिजॉन्टल एक्सकवेशंस. हड़प्पा में क्या देख हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन में क्या देखने के लिए मिला है हमें? वर्टिकल एक्सकवेशंस तो हो रहे हैं, बट हॉरिजॉन्टल एक्सकवेशंस की पॉसिबिलिटी काफी लिमिटेड है. व्हाई? Because many of the Harappan sites are situated beneath the presently populated regions, right? Therefore, people would have to be cleared out, displaced in order to excavate those sites. Secondly, new things have come to light, such as as the human population has expanded, the human footprint, the human presence has spread to previously uninhabited regions, जहां पे ये कई सारी sites present थी. With the expanding human footprint, the developmental story has also followed. तो वहां पे अब नए हाउसिंग प्रोजेक्ट बनने लग गए हैं, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे डेवलपमेंट होने लग गया है, रोड्स आर बीइंग लेन, sewage lines are being laid down, railways are being laid, right? न्यू डेवलपमेंटल प्रोजेक्ट्स के कॉरिडोर्स बन रहे हैं, and this has also resulted in the destruction of many of these sites, right? So even before archaeologists had the opportunity to excavate them, to study them, many of these sites have been degraded. So there are a number of practical problems associated with archaeology. So because of this, the question with regards to the origin of the Harappan civilization is not a straightforward one. Its answer is quite challenging to decipher. And ऐसे में हुआ क्या है? कोई क्लियर पिक्चर इमर्ज हो पाया है? नहीं. Naturally, the subject of the origin of the Harappan civilization has become a matter of debate. Clear? यहाँ पे two prominent theories have been put forward. One is the theory of sudden origin, also known as the diffusionist theory, also known as the foreign origin theory, or the Mesopotamian origin theory. So, which set of historians do you think would claim that the cities of the Harappan civilization were the work of foreigners? Would it be nationalist historians or colonial historians? Colonial historians, so they would try to attribute the creation of the Harappan civilization to foreigners. They have a tendency to associate all golden phases of Indian past with foreign influence, right? So important scholars included Gordon, Kramer, E.J.H. Mackay, and E. Mortimer Wheeler. Right? Gordon, Kramer, and Mackay have argued that people from foreign lands came to this part of the subcontinent and established the Harappan civilization, constructed the cities, and transferred the technology and agricultural know-how to the local communities, which was responsible for the sudden origin of the Harappan civilization. So So people from foreign lands, specifically from Mesopotamia, came to the Indus Valley, conquered it, and settled here. Mortimer Wheeler, on the other hand, says that it was not people from Mesopotamia, rather their ideas which came to India through the trade routes that existed between these two civilizational centers. So it was the result of the diffusion of ideas through trade routes which was responsible. Now, ये तो देख लिया हमने बेसिक प्रेमिस क्या है. आइडिया क्या है? Either people from Mesopotamia or their ideas were responsible for the sudden emergence of the Harappan civilization from fully built up cities. Now, what is the evidence that they have given in support of their theory? Firstly, they have highlighted that the Mesopotamian civilization was much older than the Harappan civilization. So logically, direction of diffusion of people or ideas क्या होना चाहिए? From Harappa to Mesopotamia or Mesopotamia to Harappa? Mesopotamia to Harappa. वहाँ के लोग already well developed थे. They had started constructing their own cities. They had developed long distance trade. They had their own script, and they simply transplanted them to the Punjab and Sindh region. Right. Secondly, they like to point out the similarities between the Mesopotamian and Harappan civilization. किस तरह की similarities? That both the Mesopotamians and Harappans lived in cities, and these cities had two levels of occupation. एक अपर टाउन होता था और एक लोअर टाउन होता था. अपर टाउन में कौन से लोग रहते थे? रूलिंग क्लास के पीपल. लोअर टाउन में द कॉमनर क्लास वाज लिविंग. And these people argued that it was natural for the foreign rulers of the Harappan cities to maintain a degree of separation from the common ruled class, right? Because the British were doing it, the Mughals had done it, the Sultans had done it, and therefore all foreign ruling class people do the same thing. Sure. They have also argued that both of them used burnt bricks. Burnt bricks were used in the construction of Harappan as well as Mesopotamian structures. They have also argued that bronze sculptures have been found from both Harappan as well as Mesopotamian cities, that both of them had knowledge of bronze metallurgy. They have also highlighted the use of script in both cases. And finally, they have talked about the presence of seals in both Harappan as well as Mesopotamian cities. In fact, they have also argued that some Mesopotamian seals have also been discovered from Harappan cities such as Mohenjo-daro or Kalibangan or Lothal or Harappa, indicating the presence of Mesopotamians in the Harappan cities as well. Okay? Further, they have argued that सॉरी इसमें यही दोनों इन्होंने एविडेंस साइट किया हुआ है. हाँ, they have argued one more thing, that if you look at the stratigraphic analysis of mature Harappan cities, you are going to find a number of sites where a well-developed mature Harappan context exists, but below that there is nothing. तो कोई occupation नहीं है इसके नीचे. तो what does that point to? यहाँ पे क्या gradual evolution हुआ है sites का? No. In fact, this was the first instance of settlement. So, on the basis of these things, it has been argued that the construction of the Harappan cities was the work of outsiders. However, this theory has been deeply criticized. किन grounds पर? That first of all, the similarities between Harappan and Mesopotamian settlements are simply superficial. They are not substantial. Now, although both Harappans as well as Mesopotamians lived in cities, was the morphology of their urban settlements the same? No. Harappan cities were known for their extensive town planning, whereas Mesopotamian cities represented what kind of development? Planned development or unplanned, haphazard development? Haphazard development. Secondly, while burnt bricks were used by both the Harappans as well as the Mesopotamians, there is a major difference. Among Harappans, the use of burnt bricks was universal. So they constructed almost all their structures using burnt bricks, whether it were the houses of the elites or the big public buildings or the fortifications or the houses of even the most ordinary people. सब कुछ burnt bricks से बनता था. On the other hand, among the Mesopotamians, burned bricks were used exclusively by the elites for construction of their large palatial houses, fortifications, and other monuments. So, the use of burned bricks was extremely selective and exclusive. Thirdly, while bronze metallurgy was known to both the Harappans as well as the Mesopotamians, यहाँ पे भी differences देखने के लिए मिलते हैं. The Harappan bronze technology appears to be inferior to the Mesopotamian bronze technology. The Harappans used poorer quality and technique for making bronze sculptures, whereas Mesopotamian bronze metallurgy appears to be far more advanced. Secondly, the use of bronze was also far more widespread in Mesopotamia as compared to Harappa. In Harappa, bronze represented a rare material and bronze sculpture and even rarer art form. ठीक है? While both had script, were the scripts of the Harappans and the Mesopotamians the same? No. Harappan script was किस तरह का स्क्रिप्ट था? लोगोसिलाबिक था या फिर पिक्टोग्राफिक था? पिक्टोग्राफिक. Instead of letters, symbols are used, consisting of more than 400 characters. And has it been deciphered yet? No, it remains undeciphered. On the other hand, Mesopotamian script was a cuneiform script. And has been deciphered. कैसे डिसाइफर किया गया इसको? Using the Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone क्या है? It was a bilingual inscription. One part of the inscription was written in the Mesopotamian script, and the same message was then repeated in another language which was already known to the archaeologists. तो इससे इसको कंपेयर करोगे तो पता लग जाएगा इसमें क्या क्या लिखा हुआ है, राइट? एंड यूजिंग दिस द मेसोपोटामियन स्क्रिप्ट वाज डिसाइफर्ड. क्यूनिफॉर्म स्क्रिप्ट किसको बोलते हैं? A script that is written with a cunis. Cunis का मतलब होता है stylus, right? So this kind of an object. लिखते किस पे रहे होंगे इससे? लकड़ी का बना रहता होगा ये. On wet clay, right? Especially wet clay tablets. Then they were allowed to dry, making those writings permanent. Okay? So this was a cuneiform script. It contained letters and alphabets instead of pictures and symbols. Clear है? So it was an alphabetical script. तो यहाँ पे भी difference देखने के लिए मिला है. And we also find that seals while they were used by both the Harappans as well as the Mesopotamians, were they the same or different? Different थे. Basic shape of the Harappan seals, rectangular or square, and the Mesopotamian seals were cylindrical. ठीक है? So do you think that all these things are the work of the same group of people, या फिर अलग अलग तरह के लोग इन्वॉल्व थे इसमें? अलग अलग तरह के लोग इन्वॉल्व थे. So the argument that Mesopotamians were responsible for the creation of the Harappan civilization, that becomes weaker. Secondly, we also have access to new archaeological findings from a wide region across the northwest of the subcontinent. And क्या रिवील हुआ है यहां से? A complete picture of evolution of the human culture over thousands of years. These are known as the antecedent cultures of the Harappan civilization. Now, कहानी शुरू होती है यहाँ पे Neolithic, Chalcolithic cultures which flourished in the northwestern portion of the subcontinent and western India from roughly 7000 BCE onwards. Gradually, they became more and more materially advanced. Their understanding of their environment also increased. They started to cultivate large numbers of crops and their population started to increase. As their population started increasing, their surplus also kept on increasing, resulting in a portion of the population becoming involved in secondary economic activities primarily or completely, and this resulted in the emergence of small towns. That is the early Harappan phase. And then life started to become more sophisticated till the mature Harappan period or the developed Harappan stage was attained. ठीक है? Thirdly, recently, a detailed genetic study was published with regards to the findings at a place called राखी गढ़ी. कहाँ पे है ये? हरियाणा में. तो now जो यहाँ पे skeletons पाए गए in the graves at राखेगढ़ी, they were subjected to DNA analysis. वहाँ पे जो surviving tissue था, especially the tissue that was extracted from the ear muscles or the cochlear region of the skull, वहाँ उसको DNA analysis किया इन्होंने. What were the researchers looking for? A particular genetic marker, a particular gene. इसको बोलते हैं R1A1 gene. Right? Now, this particular gene is present in all people with Iranian steppe ancestry. ठीक है? तो जो नॉर्थ ईरान का कैस्पियन सी से लगा हुआ रीजन है ना, उसको बोलते हैं इरानियन स्टेप रीजन. एंड वहां से जितने भी लोग आए हैं या फिर उनके डिसेंडेंट्स, सब में ये R1A1 जीन देखने के लिए मिलता है. राइट? Now, did these researchers discover this gene, find this gene through this DNA analysis in these skeletons? No, nahi mila. So, this gene was absent from the skeletons at Rakhegadi. But what do we find? That it is a permanent fixture in all of the DNA specimens extracted from graves in Mesopotamian or Persian cities. Okay? So it is a universal feature of Mesopotamian, Persian and Egyptian skeletons. What does this tell us? There was no genetic connection between the skeletons at Rakhegadi and the skeletons in these places. Okay? And this is also going to finally put to rest the idea that the Harappan civilization was the work of foreigners, of Mesopotamians. And in such a scenario, the second explanation becomes more plausible. Second explanation क्या है? It is the theory of gradual origin or indigenous origin. What does it state? That the Harappan civilization emerged gradually from the antecedent cultures of Western and Northwestern India to assume the characteristics of a well-developed and extensive Bronze Age civilization. This process took place over thousands of years and not in a matter of a few centuries. ठीक है? Scholars associated with this theory, Amlanand Ghosh and Muhammad Rafiq Mughal. Amlanand Ghosh has primarily identified the similarities between the pottery of the Sothi Siswal culture which flourished in the Gujarat, Sindh, and Rajasthan region, and the Harappan civilization. Now, Sothi Seaswal culture flourished just before the emergence of the Harappan civilization. Argument kya tha? That people who were responsible for the Sothi Seaswal culture were also responsible for the Harappan civilization. When they were in this phase, this was a pre-civilizational rural Neolithic, Chalcolithic, pastoral and agrarian culture. They then began practicing surplus agriculture. They started to participate more intensely in trading and craft production activities. The size of their settlements started to grow up and finally assumed the characteristics of a proper civilization. M.R. Mughal, on the other hand, has gone beyond pottery. To explore similarities in other fields as well, such as religion, agriculture, technology, construction technique, town planning, script, etc. And he has also gone beyond the Sothi Seaswal culture only. He has said that the Harappan civilization was the work not only of the people of or the descendants of the Sothi Seaswal culture, but also the people of other Chalcolithic and Neolithic communities which existed in this region just before the emergence of the Harappan civilization. Cultures such as the Iran, Balochi culture, or the Ghaggar, Akra culture, etc. ठीक है, और भी कल्चर्स यहाँ पे आप लिख सकते हैं. Is this much clear? They also point out that there are several sites where we find a clear picture of evolution from pre-Harappan to early Harappan to mature Harappan without any break. Can you give certain examples of such sites? बनावली में ये देखने के लिए मिलता है. प्री हरप्पन कॉन्टेक्स्ट भी, अर्ली हरप्पन भी, मच्योर हरप्पन भी. हरप्पा में अर्ली एंड मच्योर हरप्पन, एटसेट्रा. ठीक है. That means the mature phase of the Harappan civilization was the work of gradual evolution over a long period without much involvement of outsiders, without much involvement of followers. But this theory is also subjected to certain limitations. क्या limitations point out कर सकते हैं हम? First of all, due to the undeciphered nature of the Harappan script, there are certain things which are hidden from us. Namely, what was the basics, what was the driving force behind the creation of such an extensive civilization and its maintenance? So what was the nature of the political organization, or what was the basis for the origin of this civilization and its sustenance? Exact forces kya responsible the? Was agriculture the main driving force, or was trade the main driving force, or was it a religion or some other kind of ideology, or was it military might? ये सब हमको नहीं पता लगता है. So we are unclear about the exact nature of the unifying force responsible for the emergence and sustenance of the Harappan civilization in the absence of usable written records. Then we also have some archaeological inconsistencies. For example, we have a number of mature Harappan sites without any pre-Harappan layer. They appear to have emerged suddenly out of nowhere. Then we also have certain sites where both a mature as well as a pre-Harappan layer exists, but there is a big gap between them. There is a sterile layer between them. That means after the early Harappan phase, they were abandoned and then they were resettled several centuries later. Thirdly, what is the theory arguing? That early pre-Harappan sites evolved into early Harappan sites and early Harappan sites evolved into mature Harappan sites. But there are several pre and early Harappan sites that never evolved further than their original states. They remained in place. They were either abandoned or continued to remain in that pre or early mature phase. Pre and early phase, right? So some early sites never matured. And the reason for these archaeological inconsistencies is going to remain hidden from us till we are able to answer this question. कि भाई इन patterns के पीछे what was the driving force? What was the unifying force? Right? So why does it appear that people who were living in the early Harappan phase suddenly decided to migrate and establish a completely new and mature Harappan settlement at a new site? Or why did they abandon those early Harappan sites? ये सब हमको तब पता लगेगा when we are able to answer this question. We cannot answer this question until we can decipher the Harappan script. Is this clear? Interspersed with a sterile layer. Interspersed with a sterile layer. Okay? We find this, for example, at Harappa. Mature Harappan sites without any pre-Harappan context. Example, मोहनजोदारो. ये हड़प्पा में देखने के लिए मिलता है, ये अमरी में देखने के लिए मिलता है. क्लियर है ये दोनों पॉइंट्स ऑफ व्यू? डू यू नीड मी टू डिक्टेट ऑल दीज थिंग्स या फिर हो जाएगा? हो जाएगा. गुड. टेक डाउन अ क्वेश्चन. Shed light on the debate regarding the origin of the Harappan civilization. (200 words). Shed light on the debate regarding the origin of the Harappan civilization. ठीक है. Next question. Trace the pattern of the evolution of the Harappan civilization from its antecedent cultures. (200 words). 15 marks. हो जाएगा ये? नहीं हो पाएगा क्योंकि बताया नहीं है अभी तक, राइट? तो हमने केवल वो एक पिक्चर दे दिया था दैट हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन इवॉल्व्ड ओवर थाउजेंड्स ऑफ इयर्स इन सेवरल स्टेजेस. सबसे पहले नियोलिथिक, कैलकोलिथिक, प्री हरप्पन और हाँ प्री हरप्पन रूरल कल्चर्स, राइट? दीज वर कंसिस्टिंग ऑफ pastoralist and agricultural communities. They evolved into early Harappan settlements which finally developed mature characteristics. तो mature Harappan settlements में डेवलप हुए. तो इसी को हमें आगे इलाबरेट करना है. पहला वाला हो जाएगा, ठीक है. एवोल्यूशन ऑफ mature Harappan civilization from the Stone Age. Right. उसको कैसे आंसर करना है? गिव मी अ कपल ऑफ मिनट्स, आई विल बी रेडी. राइट, सॉरी अबाउट दैट। हाँ, तो हमें क्या बात करनी थी? द stages of evolution of Harappan civilization from the Stone Age to the mature Harappan period, right? So write down. According to the theory of gradual evolution, according to the theory of gradual evolution, comma, the Harappan civilization was the end result. The Harappan civilization was the end result of a long process of cultural development, of a long process of cultural development that lasted thousands of years. Full stop. This process may be divided into the following stages. कौन कौन सी stages हैं? Write down. Pre-Harappan age, pre-Harappan age, that is 7000 to 3400 BC. Number 2, early Harappan age, 3200 to 2600 BC. And number 3, mature Harappan age, 2600 to 1900 BC. Give the first heading, early Harappan age. Sorry, pre-Harappan age. Pre-Harappan age. It was during this period that initially Neolithic and later Chalcolithic cultures began emerging in which part of the subcontinent? In the northwestern portion of the subcontinent. कहां पर? On the outskirts of the Indus and Ghaggar Hakra river systems. किस तरह के कल्चर से मर्ज हुए? दी मेहरगढ़ और चोलिस्तान कल्चर, दी Ghaggar, Hakra culture, the Sothi, Siswal culture, the Iran, Balochi culture, etc. कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स क्या थे इनके? Did they begin cultivation and animal husbandry, or did they remain in the hunter-gatherer phase of life? Began agriculture and animal husbandry. ठीक है. Did they continue living in makeshift camps and moving from place to place, or did they start setting up permanent settlements, permanent villages? Did they continue constructing their structures using the wattle daub technique to construct mud houses, mud thatched huts, or did they start constructing mud brick houses? Mud brick houses. Did they continue governing themselves through the norms of band society organic structure, or did a corporate governance structure start to emerge? Corporate governance structure started to emerge. So early political formation started happening. What was the nature of their agriculture? Was it a high level intensive agriculture resulting in a large surplus, or was it subsistence level agriculture resulting in a no or very little surplus? Little surplus था. And thus hunting and gathering activities continued to be an important source of food for them. ठीक है. What were the limiting factors with regards to agriculture in this region? जैसे मेहरगढ़ वाला रीजन देख लीजिए अगर, तो कहाँ पर लोकेटेड है? बलोचिस्तान में लोकेटेड है. What is the climate of this area? Is it a warm and wet climate, humid climate है, या फिर dry and arid है? Arid climate है. ठीक है. Initially, they were located far away from the river valleys. They were located on the outskirts of the river valleys. Arid regions में located थे. So there was scarcity of water. ठीक है. What was the level of technology that they had access to? Did they have access to sophisticated agricultural implements such as plows, etc.? नहीं था. So had they started using the animal power for agricultural activities? No. ठीक है। एंड अब चेंज क्या होगा, इन्हीं चीजों में चेंज आएगा। क्या, that from the arid regions they are going to move towards relatively more fertile regions, that is the upper courses of the Indus River and its tributaries. ठीक है। Their technological know-how is also going to improve and use of the wooden plow is going to be introduced. They are going to start harnessing animal power for agricultural activities, especially plowing of the soil, right? So a section of the population at Balochistan or at Mehergarh started to migrate. कहां पर? Towards the upper course of the Indus system, right? Now, is the upper course of any perennial river the best place to cultivate? एग्रीकल्चर के लिए मोस्ट सुटेबल जोन कौन सा होता है? द लोअर कोर्स और द अपर कोर्स ऑफ एनी रिवर सिस्टम? लोअर कोर्स, क्योंकि वहां पे पानी बहुत ज्यादा होता है, पानी का फ्लो स्लोअर होता है एंड अलूवियम डिपॉजिट बहुत रिच होता है. देयरफॉर इवन आफ्टर माइग्रेटिंग टुवर्ड्स दिस रीजन द एंड ऑल्दो कुछ इंप्रूवमेंट्स हुए थे बट ड्रास्टिक चेंज नहीं आ पाया. ठीक है. Agricultural surplus appeared, but it remained low. It remained small. Technological improvements took place. For example, the use of the wooden plow, etc. took place. Stone technology became more refined, and the stone quarries that were found along the Balochistan Afghanistan border, they were used to construct a large number of sophisticated implements such as scythes, right, or axes. And the technique of using animal power for agricultural purposes was introduced. Along with this, the wheel, which till now was being used only for the purpose of pottery, was repurposed for transportation. Bullock carts were constructed for the first time, right? And while this set of changes was not sufficient to overcome the natural limitations of agriculture in this in the upper course of the river valley, क्या होगा अब? It provided the next stage for evolution of settled society. अच्छा, ये जो अर्ली हड़प्पन प्री हड़प्पन फेज है, इसमें भी हमने देखा है कि हमने दो पार्ट्स में इसको डिवाइड किया हुआ है, राइट? So when we are talking about the Mehergarh Chiulistan culture, we are talking about sites such as Mehergarh. But once they migrated to the upper course of the Indus Valley, new settlements emerged such as Remanderi, Kila Tarkai, Mundi Gak, दम सदात एटसेट्रा, बहुत सारे हैं यहाँ पर. ठीक है. Next stage of evolution is going to follow another major migration. Migration from the upper course of the Indus River system to the lower course of the Indus River system. Clear? यहाँ पे कई advantages थे. क्या? Rich alluvium was deposited by the Indus, Saraswati and their tributaries, making the soil extremely fertile. There was abundant supply of water. There was abundant availability of timber, which could be used for construction purposes, right? However, some limitations were also present. Kya? That the lower courses of the river valleys are often vulnerable to frequent flooding. Now, flooding of the lower course of the river valley is a major factor behind the renewal of soil fertility, but it can be very dangerous for human habitation, right? And therefore, the rivers had to be tamed. So, to overcome these limitations, what did the people started doing? They started construction of dams, barrages and bunds to harness the power of the river. क्या शुरू किया इन्होंने? फ्लड इरिगेशन. And result of flood irrigation क्या था? What happened to agricultural productivity? That increased. The size of the agricultural surplus, that also increased. What is going to happen to the human population as a result? More production means more population. The rate of growth of the agricultural surplus, however, was greater than the growth of the rate of population. Therefore, there would always be a large surplus available. And अब ये जो workforce है, did it need to be involved in agriculture only? No, it could now be repurposed towards secondary economic activities such as crafts production and trading activities. And as the crafts production and trading activities became more intense, the craftsmen as well as traders, would they prefer living in the rural setting or would they start to come together in common markets? Common markets, so that the interchange exchange of goods becomes easier, right? So that is why this provided the trigger towards urbanization. Now, obviously, in the initial stage, the cities और towns would have been smaller in size. तो पहले जो small villages थे वो बड़े villages बनने होंगे, बड़े villages towns, cities, towns बने होंगे, and then towns are going to become cities, and the cities are going to then become metropolises. ठीक है? Now, in cities में कौन रह रहा है? Craftsmen and traders. Are they agrarian people or non-agrarian people? They are not associated with agriculture at all. They are one step removed from the primary production process. Therefore, to sustain this population, क्या करना होगा? एग्रीकल्चरल सरप्लस को रूरल सेटिंग से अर्बन सेटिंग्स में ट्रांसफर करना होगा, राइट? एंड हु वुड बी रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर दिस ट्रांसफरेंस? Some kind of political structure, some kind of government. So governance is going to emerge. Some political structure would be responsible for maintaining law and order in these cities, transporting or shifting the surplus from the villages towards the cities, providing these people the necessary raw material, etc. Now, would such activities take place in an isolated center, या फिर इस तरह के अलग अलग सेंटर्स इमर्ज हो जाएंगे उन सब जगहों पर where there is a large enough surplus, right? So for example, this is the course of a river and its tributaries. इंडस रिवर का मान लेते हैं, right? तो all this, let's see, all this would be the settlement zone. राइट? तो ये जितना भी पूरा एरिया है ये सब सेटलमेंट जोन का पार्ट होगा. ठीक है, जितना भी ये ग्रीन में शेडेड वाला एरिया है. And what are we going to see? That if this area is in a position to support the emergence of a particular trading site, then यहाँ पे एक कॉमन मार्केट इमर्ज हो जाएगा, एक सिटी का इमर्जेंस हो जाएगा. सिमिलरली वन सिटी में इमर्ज ओवर हियर, सिमिलरली में वन सिटी में इमर्ज ओवर हियर, यहाँ पे एक हो जाएगा, यहाँ पे एक हो जाएगा, यहाँ पे एक हो जाएगा, and so on and so forth. This is the pattern that we are going to find over here, right? And gradually what we are going to see, that instead of these centers acting as centers of local trade, they are going to become connected to each other. तो ये रिवर रूट्स तो एग्जिस्ट कर ही रहे हैं, साथ में लैंड रूट्स भी इमर्ज हो जाएंगे. Who is going to be responsible for conducting this long distance trade? The trading community facilitated by the government structure. अब ये लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस ट्रेड और गवर्नेंस के लिए क्या इसकी जरूरत होगी? वन न्यू इंस्ट्रूमेंट इज गोइंग टू बी रिक्वायर्ड, दैट इज written ledgers and records. Written accounts are going to be maintained, written records would have to be maintained. सबके लिए क्या चाहिए होगा? स्क्रिप्ट चाहिए होगा. Is this clear? अच्छा. Now all these things started taking place in the early Harappan phase itself. However, the surplus was still relatively small, and as a result, ये वाले जो characteristics हैं, they were not very well developed. Cities had started to emerge, but they were relatively smaller. The element of town planning was not very well implemented. The governance structure also seems to have been weaker, having limited ability. Script was used, but its use was not widespread at this stage. Change कब आएगा? When the surplus becomes large enough. Okay? That is the mature Harappan phase. That is from 2600 to 1900 BC. यहां पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? All the characteristics associated with the Harappan civilization manifested themselves in their developed form. For example, large well-planned cities emerged. A large agricultural surplus was present to sustain these cities. Long distance trade flourished. The use of script became universal. There was a great degree of standardization across the civilization in terms of the weights and measures that were being used, the script that was being found, the kinds of seals that were in circulation, etc. इन सब में standardization emerge हो जाएगा. So we can say that ये जो stage है, this emerged after a long process of gradual evolution lasting thousands of years. Now, early Harappan phase के कुछ important sites, आमरी, कोट दीजी, रहमान ढेरी, गुमला, कुल्ली, क्वेटा, नाल, जोब, मुंडी गाक, सुकूर, पादरी, बनावली, हरप्पा, एटसेट्रा. ठीक है. और मैच्योर हरप्पा के जो यूजुअल सस्पेक्ट्स हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल हरप्पा, मोहनजोदारो, राखीगढ़ी, लेट्स से ढोलावीरा, एटसेट्रा. ठीक है. तो जो मोस्ट प्रोमिनेंट साइट्स हैं उसमें से 3-4 आप मेंशन कर सकते हैं. All the characteristics associated with the Harappan civilization manifested themselves in their developed form. समझ में आया है ये 3 स्टेजेस ऑफ एवोल्यूशन? क्या देखा है हमने? प्री-हड़प्पन फेज में the evolution of Neolithic cultures into subsistence level farming cultures with technological improvements. Second stage में, that is the early Harappan phase, we see the emergence of the stage of agricultural surplus, which was relatively small. We also see the emergence of smaller towns and cities in the lower Indus. And we see a gradually increasing trend in surplus, trade, and urbanization. And finally, mature Harappan phase में we see the developed form of the civilization. ठीक है, अब ये बताओ कि when do you think the earliest contact between the Harappan civilization and the Mesopotamian civilization would have emerged along the boundary between the early and mature Harappan phase? Mature Harappan phase was characterized by flourishing overseas trade. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे अगर फ्लरिशिंग ओवरसीज ट्रेड है तो यानी कि ओवरसीज ट्रेड की शुरुआत इसके पहले ही हो गई होगी. सो इट वाज और the foreign trade of the Harappans emerged towards the later half of the early Harappan age. कैसे होता था ये ट्रेड? लैंड रूट से या सी रूट से? इनिशियली लैंड रूट वाज यूज्ड. Now, if you look at the geography of this region, क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? राइट, इस तरह का पिक्चर देखने के लिए मिलता है. Now, the Harappan civilization किस रीजन में? रफली इस रीजन में, राइट. पर्शियन सिविलाइजेशन इस रीजन में, एंड मेसोपोटामियन सिविलाइजेशन इस रीजन में टाइग्रिस यूफ्रेटिस रिवर सिस्टम्स, राइट, इराक, सीरिया, इजराइल, पैलेस्टाइन, वो वाले रीजन में देखने के लिए मिलता है। तो वॉज देयर एनी डायरेक्ट लिंक बिटवीन हड़प्पा एंड मेसोपोटामिया? नो। बीच में एक ऐसा जोन था जहां पर कोई सिविलाइजेशन एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता था, बट दिस वॉज नॉट एन अनइनहैबिटेड जोन। कौन रहते थे यहाँ पे? ट्राइबल्स ऑफ द ईरान बलोची कल्चर, राइट, एंड इट वॉज these people who emerged as the interlocutors between the Harappan civilization and the civilizations of West Asia in the initial phase. इस रीजन का क्लाइमेट कैसा है? Arid climate है. Do you think that people can rely upon agriculture to sustain themselves? No. Therefore, agriculture forms a very small part of their occupational mix. They are rather still dependent primarily upon pastoralism, pastoral activities. ठीक है? They are nomadic by nature. Clear? Now, during the wet season, is it advisable for these people to stay with their animals in the plains जहां पे फ्लडिंग होगी? नहीं. तो ये लोग क्या करेंगे? They would migrate towards the hills. And hills कहां पे हैं इस रीजन में? Towards the middle. सुलेमान किरतार माउंटेन रेंजेस भी हैं फॉर एग्जाम्पल, राइट, उसके नीचे फुट हिल्स भी हैं. देर आर सेवरल माउंटेन पासेस ऑल्सो. So in the dry season, in the wet season, in the summer season, they would move towards the hills. और जो drier season है, they would come down from the hills and move into the plains on both sides. इस साइड भी पहुंच जाएंगे और इस साइड भी पहुंच जाएंगे. Thus coming into contact with both the Persian civilization people as well as the Harappan civilization people, right? क्या करेंगे यहाँ पे आकर के? They are going to exchange goods, right? And ultimately, what are they going to start doing? They are going to start becoming the interlocutors between the Persians and the Harappans. इधर का सामान उधर पहुंचाने का काम, उधर का सामान इधर लाने का काम ये नोमैडिक पैस्टोरलिस्ट करेंगे. ठीक है? राइट डाउन. Initially, this trade was conducted over the land route, and was facilitated primarily by the nomadic pastoralists of the Iran Balochi culture. लिखो. During the wet season, subpoint. During the wet season, comma, these pastoralists would move to the hills, would concentrate in the hills. These pastoralists would concentrate in the hills and exchange goods with other bands of pastoralists. Full stop. Next subpoint. In the dry season, they would move into the plains of Punjab and Iran coming into contact with the settled civilizations of these regions. With the settled civilizations of these regions. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. Later, comma, overseas trade emerged as another medium of commerce between India and West Asia. Between India and West Asia. लेकिन ये कब होगा? During the early Harappan period or the mature Harappan period? Mature Harappan. Full stop. This was a unique characteristic of the mature Harappan period. That is trade via the sea route. Trade via the sea route. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. मच्योर हड़प्पा में आपने क्या लिखा है? मच्योर हड़प्पन पीरियड में क्या क्या लिखा है आपने? हाँ, ऑल द कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स एसोसिएटेड विद, ये सब इमर्ज हो गया. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. In the mature Harappan cities, comma, a large number of non-agrarian sections had to be supplied with food and raw material. Full stop. Surplus had to be channelized from the villages to these cities. From the villages to these cities. Full stop. Further, standardization of weights, measures, and other systems was necessary to facilitate trade. Full stop. Thus, a state emerged. Full stop. Next point. The development of script took place in order to facilitate governance and trade. in order to facilitate governance and trade. We find the earliest evidence of the use of script from an early Harappan site known as Padri. This is in present day गुजरात. ठीक है, यहाँ पे आप लिख सकते हो पादरी, earliest evidence of Harappan script. Is this clear? ठीक है. So 3 stages of evolution of Harappan civilization from pre to mature Harappan. ये समझ में आया है? क्वेश्चन आता है इसके ऊपर तो एड्रेस कर लेंगे. Next, we need to talk about the prominent characteristics of the Harappan civilization. So when you think of the characteristics or features of the Harappan civilization, what are the things that come first to your mind? किस तरह का civilization था? Cities थी? Yes. So it was an urban civilization. किस तरह का urbanization? Well planned urbanization या फिर unplanned urbanization? Well planned cities were there. And it represented the earliest phase of urbanization in India. तो पहला point लिखो, पहला characteristic. The Harappan civilization represented the first phase of urbanization in India. In India. Full stop. Harappan cities were well planned and no other contemporary civilization were well planned and no other contemporary civilization could match its level of town planning. And no other contemporary civilization could match its level of town planning. ठीक है? अच्छा, अगर क्रोनोलॉजिकली हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन को किसी एज में फिट करना है तो कहां पे कर सकते हैं? Did it belong to the Neolithic age? No. Did it belong to the Chalcolithic age? Yes, because the use of copper was evident in the Harappan towns as well. But is it characterized as a Chalcolithic civilization? Nahi. It is characterized as a Bronze Age civilization, right? अब ये Bronze Age civilization is actually referring to a group of civilizations which flourished roughly in the same time period at the same time. However, even over here, the Harappan civilization was unique. कैसे? It appears to be far larger and in several respects much more advanced than any other Bronze Age civilization. At the same time, we can also say that although it flourished in India in the Chalcolithic context, it is not categorized as a Chalcolithic civilization. It belongs to the Bronze Age. So write down. The Harappan civilization, next main point, next characteristic. The Harappan civilization is part of the sisterhood of Bronze Age civilizations? Other contemporary civilizations you are aware of, Bronze Age civilizations? Name them. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, etc. Right? Then further write down. Although it emerged during the Chalcolithic age, it was distinct due to the use of bronze metal. Now, if you look at the distribution of prominent Harappan cities, क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? Most of the cities are located where? Along the rivers. यही देख करके जो पुराने हिस्टोरियंस थे, the early historians, they characterize the Harappan civilization as a riverine civilization. And what is the basic factor for the emergence of such a riverine civilization? A large agricultural surplus forms the basis. So the very basis of civilization is agriculture and the surplus that it generates. However, since then, the categorization of a Harappan civilization as a riverine civilization has been questioned. क्यों? Recently, there have been a number of new discoveries of settlements located far away from the fertile Indus and Saraswati river zones. They are located in the arid and semi-arid regions. Such as Balochistan, such as the Ran, etc. Right? यहाँ पे do you think agriculture would have been sufficient to support such a large settlement? No. And therefore, many new historians have started to argue that agriculture was not the primary basis for the Harappan civilization. Rather, its main engine was trade. Trade was necessary not only for shifting agricultural surplus from the more fertile regions to these arid regions, but also for the prosperity of these arid regions, which allowed them to import the agricultural surplus of other surplus areas. Okay? Write down. Next main point likho. Earlier historians characterized the Harappan civilization as a river valley civilization. Characterize the Harappan civilization as a river valley civilization, where the basic driving force was agriculture. सब पॉइंट लिखो. The recent discoveries of a large number of new sites the recent discoveries of a large number of new cities outside the traditional agricultural zone, such as Balochistan and Kutch, has prompted historians to challenge the older notion full stop. Next subpoint. It appears that trade and crafts production must have played a very important role in Harappan urbanization. और क्या बोल सकते हैं हम हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन के बारे में? Did the Harappans enjoy a good standard of living, or were they mostly poor? Good standard of living, levels of prosperity were relatively high. Write down. The Harappans had a large, prosperous, and flourishing economy with a flourishing economy. And was the Harappan economy diversified or not? ये केवल एक ही सेक्टर पे डिपेंडेंट था. Diversified था, with a diverse base, Full stop. Subpoint. The large agricultural surplus was mobilized towards city construction, infrastructure development, crafts production, and trade. And what would have been required to mobilize this large agricultural surplus towards these activities? Some kind of political authority, right? The ability of the political authority to channelize the surplus and regulate such an extensive market indicates कि state कैसा रहा होगा. A state with lower sophistication or highly sophisticated state? Highly sophisticated state. So write down. हाँ. While the exact nature of the ruling class is not clear, comma, it can be said with certainty, it can be said with certainty that the Harappans had a sophisticated state, had a sophisticated state, which could control the vast civilization, facilitate trade, and impose a high degree of uniformity and standardization. And standardization, uniformity and standardization. ठीक है? अच्छा. Talking about the Harappan society, characteristic क्या था? Was it homogeneous or diverse? Diverse. Simple or complex? Complex society था. Was it flat or stratified? Stratified. Right? So complex, diverse and stratified society. Write down. The Harappans had a complex, diverse and stratified society. Had a complex, diverse and stratified society. Full stop. Subpoint. Harappan cities consisted of multiple races, religions and classes living side by side. Living side by side. ठीक है? How do we know? Multiple races कैसे पता लगता है? On the basis of the analysis of the skeletons, right? Skulls को analyze करके पता लग सकता है. और multiple faiths के बारे में कैसे पता लगता है? Discovery of different kinds of images of gods and goddesses, different images on the seals, उसमें भी अलग-अलग images मिले हैं. The presence of different kinds of altars, for example, fire altars or snake altars or water altars, etc. Different funerary practices, कहीं पे double burial हो रहा है, कहीं पे direct burial, कहीं पे coffin burial हो रहा है, कहीं पे partial burial, कहीं पे fragmentary burial, कहीं पे urn burial हो रहा है, right? So these kinds of things are happening. So that tells us different faiths भी present हैं. Different classes कैसे पता लगता है? Grave goods. Some grave goods have extremely valuable, some are extremely valuable, some are of lower quality, some have larger tombs, some have smaller tombs. Then we can also analyze the sizes of the houses. The rich are going to live in extremely large, well-appointed houses, and poor ordinary people कहाँ पे रहेंगे? In small single-roomed apartments or two-roomed apartments at the most. ठीक है? Then political differentiation था या नहीं था? था. We know from the presence of public buildings such as granaries. We know from the presence of fortifications. We know from the division of the cities into an upper and lower town, into a citadel and lower town, right? So ये सब बताता है कि complex, diverse and stratified society exist करता था. Is this clear? But was the level of division between the different classes the same as the level of division in other Bronze Age societies? No. Harappan civilization was relatively more egalitarian. Right? कैसे बोल सकते हैं हम ये? If we consider the case of the Mesopotamian cities, वहां पे बर्न्ड ब्रिक यूज होता था. यस, यूज तो होता था, लेकिन किस तरह की बिल्डिंग्स कंस्ट्रक्ट करने के लिए? बड़े मॉन्यूमेंट्स कंस्ट्रक्ट करने के लिए, या फिर बड़े लोगों के लिए पैलेसेस वगैरह बनाने के लिए. राइट? हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन में बर्न ब्रिक का यूज होता था. यस. फॉर व्हाट? सबके लिए होता था. इट वाज नॉट एन एलीट मटेरियल. राइट? Secondly, do you find the presence of extremely large and lavish monuments in Harappa? No. And what does this indicate? That the Mesopotamian elite had, you can say, cornered an extreme or appropriated an extremely large portion of the surplus for themselves, whereas wealth was relatively more equally divided in Mesopotamia. Clear है? Write down. अभी क्या लिखा है आपने? There existed several ethnic races, religions and classes side by side. Next point लिखो. On the basis of archaeology, comma, it is easy to see the difference between the rich and the poor. But as compared to the Mesopotamian civilization, comma, the Harappan civilization appears to be far more egalitarian. Next point. Unlike Mesopotamia, the elites did not build grand monuments shrines or palaces for themselves. In Harappa, for themselves in Harappa. Next point. Similarly, unlike Mesopotamia, burnt bricks were used for the construction of all structures, comma, both elite and common. Both elite and common. Next point. Therefore, it appears that the Mesopotamian ruling class appropriated a massive portion of the surplus for itself, while wealth was relatively more well distributed or relatively more widespread in the Harappan civilization. In the Harappan civilization. ठीक है? And this point is also further driven home by the widespread use of script in the Harappan civilization. मेसोपोटामिया और हड़प्पा दोनों के लोग स्क्रिप्ट को यूज करते थे, लेकिन मेसोपोटामिया में स्क्रिप्ट कहां से मिलता है? From clay tablets and stone inscriptions primarily. These are associated with which group? The elites or the common people? Elites, right? वो अपने रिटन ऑर्डर्स उस पे स्क्रिप्ट पे टैबलेट में लिखवाते होंगे या फिर स्टोन्स पे इंस्क्राइब करते होंगे. Mesopotamian script is not only found from signboards or seals, but also from pottery, potsherds, right? That means the use of script was much more widespread. This indicates the high levels of literacy. ठीक है? Whereas Mesopotamia में literacy was limited. ठीक है? Write down next main point. This egalitarian social ethos is also reflected in the widespread use of script, which indicates a high degree of literacy. Unlike Mesopotamia. Literacy, unlike Mesopotamia. Right? Take down a question. Enumerate the important characteristics of the Harappan civilization. Full stop. Compare it to contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. 200 words, 15 marks. कैसे अप्रोच करना चाहिए? दोनों पार्ट्स को अलग अलग लिखना चाहिए या साथ में करना चाहिए? साथ में करना चाहिए. दैट वुड बी दी बेटर थिंग टू डू. तो जितने भी 5, 6, 7 जितने भी आपको फीचर्स यहाँ पे बताए हुए हैं, आप उसको एन्यूमरेट करोगे, बताओगे कि भाई हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन फॉर एग्जाम्पल was an urban civilization, but the kind of Harappan urbanization was completely different. The level of town planning was much more advanced. ये दुनिया में कहीं और नहीं दिखता है in the contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. In this way you are going to move forward. For example, you can talk about the presence of a complex, diverse and stratified society, but with a more egalitarian bias as compared to other contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. ठीक है? तो इस तरह से जैसे जैसे आप इन्यूमरेट करोगे वैसे ही कंपेयर करते जाओगे. सो दैट वुड बी द बेस्ट स्ट्रैटेजी टू एड्रेस द डिमांड्स ऑफ दिस क्वेश्चन. ठीक है? सो कोई डाउट्स तो नहीं है? आई एम गोइंग टू एंड दिस लेक्चर नाउ. हाँ, दूसरे में उसके कंटेम्प्रेरीज का। आपको इसमें हाईलाइट करना है डिफरेंसेस को, ठीक है। तो फॉर एग्जांपल ब्रॉन्ज एज सिविलाइजेशन बोलोगे, लेकिन साथ में बताओगे दी हरप्पन ब्रॉन्ज एज टेक्नोलॉजी सीम्स टू बी इंफीरियर टू अदर कंटेम्प्रेरी ब्रॉन्ज एज सिविलाइजेशंस, फॉर एग्जांपल मेसोपोटामिया। तो वो करने का ना कि पहले हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन की कैरेक्टरिस्टिक लिखो, फिर उसके बाद दूसरे कैरेक्टरिस्टिक लिखो, दैट विल नॉट फुलफिल द डिमांड्स ऑफ द क्वेश्चन। यू विल बी सिंपली नोटिंग डाउन द डिफरेंट फैक्ट्स। दोनों को लिंक भी करना है एक दूसरे से, क्योंकि दोनों को कंपेयर करने की जरूरत है। सो यू हैव टू प्रोवाइड अ वैल्यू जजमेंट, और एटलीस्ट इफ यू आर नॉट प्रोवाइडिंग अ वैल्यू जजमेंट कि एक को इंफीरियर और एक को सुपीरियर नहीं बोल रहे हो, तो कम से कम उसके कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स के बेसिस पर उनमें डिफरेंशिएशन आपको क्लैरिफाई करना पड़ेगा, ठीक है। कि हाँ दोनों अर्बन थे, लेकिन एक में प्लानिंग था, एक में प्लानिंग नहीं था, ये बताना पड़ेगा। अगर आप वैसे करते हो कि दोनों के केवल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स इन्यूमरेट करोगे, तो लेट अस टॉक अबाउट अर्बनाइजेशन। Harappan civilization, did it consist of cities? Yes. Mesopotamian civilization, did it consist of cities? Yes. Egypt में भी cities थी, चाइना में भी cities इमर्ज हुई। ऐसा करने का फायदा होगा कोई? नहीं होगा, because instead of highlighting the differences, you are simply pointing out the similarities, ठीक है। तो आपको कंपेयर करने के लिए जहां पे बोला जाए, तो वहां पे डिफरेंसेस आपको दिखाने पड़ेंगे इफ दे आर प्रेजेंट, ओके। चलिए, तो आई एम गोइंग टू एंड दिस डिस्कशन फॉर नाउ। हमने कुछ फीचर्स को इन जनरल देख लिया है, बट ये जो इकोनॉमिक लाइफ है, द नेचर ऑफ द पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम है, सोशल स्ट्रक्चर, पॉलिटी, कल्चर, रिलीजन एटसेट्रा, दिस वी हैव टू टॉक इन ग्रेटर डिटेल, वो कल की क्लास में हम करते हैं, राइट। नाउ टुमारोज क्लास, उसकी टाइमिंग अलग होगी। कल की क्लास 5 बजे से होगी, ठीक है, क्योंकि पहले अपनी जीएस वाली क्लास होगी 2 बजे से, फिर उसके बाद 5 बजे से ये अपना हिस्ट्री फाउंडेशन वाला क्लास होगा, राइट। चलिए देन, थैंक यू फॉर योर टाइम, आई विल सी यू गाइस टुमारो।